So for me, kind of the condition aspect of mattering is the social justice issues, and mattering can also be worthiness or dignity. So it's been very important for us to how to create conditions that people can live dignified lives, so that people can really feel that it's room for you.
Hello and welcome. I'm Abbie. This is Stories Lived, Stories Told, and today I invite you to join me in conversation with Ottar and Ness as we take a communication perspective on mattering and social sustainability. To take a communication perspective is to consider what we're making and how we're making it through our communication practices. This means we look closely at patterns, context, stories, and relationships, and that we use curiosity, mindfulness, collaboration, and dialogue to create better social worlds. So whether the topic of today's conversation is familiar to you or not, the hope is that using a communication perspective will reveal new ways of seeing and being for all of us. At the top of the episode, you heard our conversation partner today, Ottar Ness. Ottar works as a professor of counseling at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and also as head of NTNU WellFare, Nordic Research Center for Wellbeing and Social Sustainability. You can learn more about Ottar and connect with him and his work in the additional information I've included in the show notes. I love this conversation with Ottar as part of our healing series because I think it provides us with some language and a path forward in terms of how do we want to heal as communities, and how can we show up to each other in a way that allows us to co-create meaningful change together. Ottar has great insight and stories to share. So as we wrap up the series on healing with this conversation, I want this episode to act as a jumping off point and for us to really start thinking about action based in these conversations. And I want us to start thinking about the choices we make and how we can let this month of conversations really mean something to us and teach us about how we can be healing ourselves and our communities using a communication perspective, and like we'll get into with Ottar today, relational construction ideas. Before we jump in, it is that time of year, the end of the year, and I'm starting to think about the next season of this podcast. So I want to invite you to participate in co-creating that next season with me by taking the survey that I have linked in the show notes. It'll mean a lot to me to hear from you how you're using the podcast, what you hope to get out of the podcast, any feedback that you'd like to share. I would like to hear from you. So again, just a quick survey. You can find it in the show notes. Fill out as much of it as you'd like, and I will greatly appreciate your participation. And now let's wrap up this month of conversations around healing with Ottar. Hello, Ottar. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Thank you, Abbie, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited about our conversation.
I'm excited too. And as always, I like to ask my guests and my conversation partners to introduce themselves. And so please share with us, who are you right now? I know that this is an ever-changing question as we're evolving in our lives, but who are you right now, and what's the story you're telling about yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. Who am I now? I'm Ottar, and I'm 47 years of age. I'm married, and we have in total 4 kids. And I'm working as a professor in counseling at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. We're here in Norway, and we are located in Trondheim, which is in the middle part of Norway, which is a long country. And otherwise, we are running a research center called WellFare, which is a Nordic Research Center on well-being and social sustainability. So I both teach and do research and hiking, and we're doing. At the moment, I'm a huge soccer fan, so Arsenal Football Club is my passion.
Great. Well, what is it? Are there specific experiences that you can maybe point to that led you to do the work that you do around social sustainability and well-being?
Yeah, the first kind of episode or thought that comes to mind is I grew up with a father who was a principal of a little school, and I think the inspiration from him. He was running the school also in very collaboration with my mother, on how that schools can be a source for social inclusion for a local community and like a community builder. I think that is maybe I've been thinking about it lately, that is maybe when I look back, the first time that I think about well-being and community well-being, especially, and we need to look at schools and kindergartens and these universal anchor institutions as community builders for promoting well-being and social sustainability. So that is maybe the first kind of comes to mind. And otherwise, I do a lot of research on poverty and low-income families and mental health issues, and I see that the well-being and social sustainability is quite a core term and core concept for the work.
Yeah. Could you define that for us, well-being and social sustainability?
That's a good question. There's kind of tons of definitions of well-being, but for our research center, theoretically, we use we're linked to the concept of capabilities approach from Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum and Ingrid Robains and among others, about having the real opportunities to live a life that you want to live and want to lead, and also based on working on the conditions that you can have a good life and being well together with your fellow citizens and your family and friends. Social sustainability is it's a huge question as well, but how I see it is that you can look at it is through this economy sustainability, financial, and you can have the climate sustainability, but you have also the social sustainability, which is more on the relationships, and that you are having living conditions that is important for the present generations, but also how to live a world that is social sustainable for future generations. That everyone has access to a good life, access to finances, access to education, and so forth. So that's maybe the short answer.
Yeah, well, that's a good, helpful place to start. I'm a lover of language, and I think it's so meaningful to be able to name different things. And so also all of us being on the same page about the definitions of those and what meaning we're making out of them is obviously very important. I know this has been, a lifelong work for you, so this is maybe a larger question than we have time to fully get into today, but I'm curious to know some of the things that you've been learning from your research around well-being.
Oh, that's a lot. I feel I learn every day, and but I have had different kind of careers. I feel in my research career. First, I started out as working with in a foundation against bullying in schools. So I learned a lot about what young people address as their wishes for having a good life and a good future, hope for the future. And then I moved into, we can get maybe back into those issues, but and then I moved to family therapy and worked in family therapy for many years, and also learned a lot about families and friends and couples kind of concepts of having good relationships that help them to contextualize a good life together. And then I moved into the mental health field, especially around serious mental illness, and this field of and a movement called recovery movement, where I learned a lot about human rights and social justice issues, about how, and especially on how what kind of living conditions to, and also the justice issues about having an opportunity to live a life that everyone else's live if you're not able to. And then lately I've been working, and then we met this professor from University of Miami, Isaac Priletensky, and then he has this concept of mattering, and then we have been very interested in that, and then we have been working a lot about action research project with low-income families and socially excluded youth, on especially here in Norway, on how how they view and how they conceptualize a good life and hopes for the future. So there's many things we can talk about in this project, in this kind of context. But mainly, if I have a red thread in it, first I think social constructionist theory and practice has helped me a lot, especially on looking into contextualized meaning making and also social justice issues, but especially on how you kind of negotiate meaning and really create opportunities for this meaning making process, so you actually can have a good life. And then the recovery movement, that's as well on that. We know that people can recover, and recovery processes doesn't happen only inside of institutions or in therapy rooms, but it happens where people live, love, and learn outside in the world. So in that sense, we have been interested in how do we create communities that people have real opportunities to participate in their life and in their communities. And then the mattering issue, which is especially from Isaac Przewalski's work, has been very valuable for us in the same issue, that it's about, if you're okay, I can go into that concept because that is really exciting for me at the moment.
Please, yeah.
Because there's many people who have written about mattering, but we have been very inspired by Isaac Przewalski's work about the psychological experiences of mattering, which is this balance between these psychological experiences of to feel valued and adding value. So he's been really important for us, that we don't only create communities or societies or where we only look at experiences of feeling valued, because then we can create these cultures of the me society or me cultures, where you can get into this individualistic discourses. But if you balance it with the adding value, so you can have real opportunities to add value in your life or in your relationships, in your family, in your community, at work, and so forth, then you kind of have a more real opportunity to create this we culture or we societies, which is more like a community-based issues. And that maybe all the findings from research I've done together with colleagues up through the years, I think mattering has been the red thread all over, because people really want to feel valued, and they want to have an opportunity to add value and contribute to their life and their society.
Yeah. So you're using mattering in the sense of not only I want to feel like I matter, but also I want to feel like the things that I do for other people and in my community matter.
Absolutely. And these are, as I said, it's more like psychological experiences. So we have been working together with Isaac Przewalski and also through other colleagues, Mike Scarpa and Salvatore Di Martino, on trying to build more like a theory of the common good in that sense, so that we work on the conditions for mattering, where we have used the theories of social justice or justice theories, for example, distributive justice, that burdens and goods are equality and evenly distributed in the society. And then we have the procedural justice, which is voice and choice, that you actually have a voice that counts. Not only say something, but your voice is really heard and taken into account. And the last justice issue is about corrective justice. If things don't work in the society, or if we fail to help people, we have to correct services or correct the society, or at least say apology. So in that sense, that is working with the conditions, and the experiences are mattering, and then we see that the outcomes then can be wellness or well-being. Another person that we have been very inspired by is Cormac Russell. And Cormac Russell, he is one of the the promoters of the ABCD model, the asset-based community models, and he has this really inspiring work where he has looked into the loneliness research, and he writes in one of his articles that has been kind of very important in this world of mattering, and what I see in all the work we're doing, that he says there's an obvious twin sister to loneliness, which is uselessness. So if you kind of have an experiences in your life that there's no use of you, that is really hard for people, and of course feed into the loneliness and feed into mental illness and mental health issues. So creating these conditions then, so people can have real opportunities to participate in their life and in their context is so valuable. And that then, of course, meaning-making processes are also important. So
that's what I was going to ask. What does it look like?
I'm talking now.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. I'm so excited to hear about this. And I was going to ask, what does it look like in the context of mattering to overlay this idea of meaning making?
Well, so many examples comes, but I can do one example from the action research we have done in Trondheim, which is called the Trondheim municipality, which is the Norway's third largest city, wanted to do radical innovations and to help and support young people and where they are socially excluded, are outside of schools and struggling with drugs and mental health problems and so forth, and then also for families in low income and with small children. But for example, there was one group of young people who were socially excluded, high on crime, mental health problems, drugs, and so forth, and they were finally asked about what do you feel or think will help you and support you to be valuable, so having a valuable social role and having participation in your society. And then this was an invitation from the municipality to these boys then, where they created these meaning-making processes, and then they have these conversations about what does it mean to be a participant and what does it mean to their lives and so forth, because they have a long history of relationship injuries in relationship with professionals, so forth. So how they have to have these meaning-making processes to create trust. And then they said, what would be helpful for us was to get help to get a driver's license, because a driver's license is their way into a job, and then none of them will have money to pay for the driver's license. And then these boys said the driver's license is a goal, of course, but the most important goal is the road to the driver's license. And they also, by these meaning-making processes, they said that we also want to have a better relationship with the police. So they asked the police to train with them when they were driving the car. And then they played football matches and so forth. And then there was a lot of these meetings with professionals and the young people and so forth. And they collaborated not only with the professionals in the municipality, they also collaborated with a private traffic school. They collaborated with the volunteers, and then these processes happened. Then some of these boys, after 1 year, the police chief called the municipality and said reports to the police had dropped by 50% by 1 year.
Wow.
It's fantastic. And then some of them boys had started to work as peer workers in the municipality, and they got in this position to try to help younger boys that were on the road to social exclusion. They took conflict mediation courses to work in the streets. Some got a job, and some started to the university and becoming a social worker or a psychologist even. It's so fascinating. And then we also invited some of them so they have been teaching in our classes, and we had this very fascinating experience based on these conversations we had between the young people and the professionals and so forth. Then we invited the CEO of the head of the city, the administrative head of the city, and one of these boys to teach our class in relationship, in organization and leadership together. So on this way of what does it mean for a top leader to really talk to and have these meaning-making processes with people who are living in those kind of positions, because they never are in these positions of their voice being heard in the municipality. And then the boy Ali, he was asked to teach about what does it mean for them to really be listened to and really given these opportunities from the top managers and municipalities. So that was a magic a magic day.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. And I just love a good story and a good example. I'm thinking back to my conversation with Gro, who you know, and all the examples she was able to give around school inclusion. And what like great examples of change actually happening. And I think that's what people need to hear, stories to help their imagination, to help them know what is possible, because I think a lot of people feel stuck and feel disenfranchised in their communities and in their societies. And so I love a great example of, well, here's a group of people who decided they wanted things to be different, and they made that change happen. So I want to go back to the beginning of that story a little bit and ask about the context. What was it, or what did it look like for this community to go from conflict, social exclusion, violence, crime, whatever was going on, to doing such a 180, such a change into this space of being in conversation with each other? What was that kind of flip? Was there things in the context that made this community more likely to get into that? I'm trying to think about people listening who maybe feel like they would love to step into that kind of change, but don't really know where to start.
Yeah. Great question. And I think we learn a lot from the social constructionist practices on how you kind of invite multiplicity of and having these negotiations of meaning instead of imposing values and manuals or projects and practices on to people. So what happened in this context was actually from the ministries in Norway. They wanted to, because there is a societal issue about social exclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So they invited and they gave money to some of the municipalities to you need to do something different to help people in these living conditions. And then they wanted to try totally different things. So they saw that they had a huge kind of opportunity space here. So the municipality said that we want to think differently. They needed to be 3 actors at least. So there should be a private actor. It should be the citizens themselves. It should be a volunteer actor and the municipality. So at least, and then all this money that came from the ministries should not go to new positions, professional positions. They were supposed to go directly to the citizens. So they needed to have the citizens on board to co-create these new solutions. So they needed to listen to how do they view the world? What are their experiences from earlier on in this in relationship with the public sector, for example, and how do they view what should help them to get hope for the future? So they that was the beginning point, and this was a huge project. So there were 9 pilots. So this group of boys for the driver's license were just one. So they did many different things in this, but the whole idea was to invite it. The model were called citizens model. So, and what we saw was that there's a lot of opportunity spaces already in the systems, but you need to have support and be creative, and especially through co-creation to see those opportunities. And especially here we have a very fragmented kind of welfare state, we have a fantastic welfare state, but it's quite fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
But if you follow the people that the citizens, then it's not fragmented. It's the system that is fragmented. But this, if you take seriously the context for the people, then you can start to see new solutions. But that means that the professionals really need to listen and take seriously what the people who are living in those contexts experience the world.
This is reflecting back to me what to me is at the heart of CMM, and maybe what was initially really intriguing to me and remains still at the core of it for me. And that is this meaning making piece in relationship with seeing yourself as an active participant in creating your social worlds. I just think that's, and maybe for some people that feels overwhelming, feels like a lot of weight on their shoulders. To me, that's really empowering to think I can actually change things. And there are, of course, things we don't have control over. But how can you look for the things that you do have some control over and be thoughtful in your meaning making process? And I think, like, not the whole story, obviously, but a great place to begin is the saying out loud of the meaning you're making. I see that in, like, in my interpersonal relationships, but also on larger scales. Like this example you're sharing is that when we can kind of make the unsaid said and say out loud, this is the meaning, not taking for granted. I think that's such an important piece too, that it doesn't have to be something you're guessing at. It doesn't have to be this game you're playing in your relationships of, if only I knew what meaning they're making. You can actually ask that question outright. And so it's cool to see that reflected back in what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think you're so right. And start with what is important for you. And what do you see value, and what is your hopes for the future? And what we also saw based from that, if you have that as a kind of a starting point, and people really feel that their voice have a choice, or their voice have a meaning, and they have, and the voice actually can impact something, then they also want to give back. So you get into a really good kind of co-creation process then, in that sense. So in that sense, mentoring kind of are very important for people to have a good well-being society. And we also see that in the Norwegian context, there has been this flip of, which we also see in internationally, that the well-being of elderly people is better, and the younger people has less levels of well-being. And also we saw that there is a social ingredient, there's social inequalities in how young people see if they are hoping to have a good life or not. And we also see that there's less participants from the lower socioeconomic status groups, from young people who participate with using their voice and using their vote in the democratic context. But when we see that people really see that their voice have a matter, their voice matter, then people participate more also in the context they are working.
Yeah, the story you shared, I could see it very clearly. I'm curious to know a little more though about what has it looked like for you in practice to really speak to this issue of mattering for people.
Yeah, it depends on how you see it, because now we did this as a kind of a so-called kind of like an action research project. So we were trying to capture and follow and introduce these theories together with the professionals, and professionals, as I experience it, is that this is exactly what we want. This is the way we want to work. So it's also to support professionals because all the professionals have a value of helping people, and they want to give people chances to live a good life. So for us, it has been supporting people, talking with people, taking the pace down, being creative, meeting people where they are, and not only on offices, being out in the community instead of, and also try to not only have public meetings, but try to be where people are. And also we are trying not only to see this term that I don't like, the hard to reach groups, because they can easily to ignore groups. So it's trying to be in the society, in the community or society where they are, has been very important. So talk to people, have time to people, and invite them on, that there's many ways of how to say it, many ways to talk about their issues. Some can talk, some can draw, some can make
Mm-hmm.
music. So for example, Ali, who was this person who taught in our class, it was fantastic. He never had taught in any classes before, and then he moved to another city to start his studies, and he didn't have any network. And instead of going to a bad network, he said that, okay, I want to continue on my positive road. So he volunteered for a poetry club.
Mm-hmm.
So when he came to teach with us here in Trondheim, he said that, oh, I have made a poem. Is it okay if I read it out loud for the students? Of course, and that is the opening of our report for the
Oh.
ministries. So it's so interesting, and that poem was called "The Ghetto Boys," I think. It was so right on spot on this mattering issue.
Mm.
Meeting people where they are, and also it can be viewed as big things, but it's through the micro things,
Yeah.
the small things, that matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's that relational construction or social construction piece for me, that it's funny to me when I think about, so my undergraduate degree is interpersonal communication.
Nice.
Communication broadly, and then my kind of focus was interpersonal, and the other options were organizational or public. And it does make sense that they would break it up that way, but to me it's kind of funny to say, what is an organization if not just a bunch of interpersonal, just a bunch of people. And so you can see it on these multiple levels
Yeah.
happening. And so
Yeah.
I really do believe that, and it's cool to hear that in your stories of
Yeah.
being great examples of, it is how we show up to each other in the little moments ultimately becomes how, in every episode, ultimately becomes how we show up to each other in our relationships and in our communities.
Oh yeah. And that has been so important, learning from me, from Kenneth Gergen and Sheila McNamee's work on
Mm,
exactly on those issues, that how we start to coordinate our actions together, also starting to be creating as meaning and worldviews.
mm,
So we need to, if there are bad kind of patterns in those relationships, then you kind of have these small disruptions.
mhm,
So that you can, and disruptions can be these small invitations, questions, or changing place where you have your conversations, or whatever. But it doesn't
mhm,
have to be these big things. People are together and coordinate their actions, and they need to be disrupted if they are not, and learn
mhm,
from what is good.
mhm. Yeah, I'm excited to talk too about your upcoming book, because it's called How People Thrive. And I can see that all of your work is very hopeful to me, that it is all kind of centered around this. And that reminds me of, this language of better social worlds, that's always the goal in
Yeah.
how we're communicating and how we're being with each other. How are we making better social worlds? So I'd love to know more about how this book maybe emerged out of this work that you're doing and out of the experiences you've had.
Oh yeah, yeah. We are so fortunate to be working together with Isaac Pilotensky and Mike Scarpa and Salvatore Di Martino about this upcoming book, which is kind of a follow-up book in one sense from Isaac and his wife Ora's book called How People Matter, which
Mhm.
is just a few years ago, and then this book is more about how people thrive, and we have looked into the different contexts on a more a relational view on how people thrive. So it's not
Mhm.
a individual kind of concept. It's very relational. And so I can't remember all the chapters now at the moment, but we have people looking into how people thrive. Me and my wife Dina, we have written one chapter about thriving families and friends,
Mm.
and some other have talked about thriving societies, thriving communities, thriving workplaces, and so forth. So we're very excited. There's a really good group of people who have contributed to this book, and I'm very looking forward to see it out.
Yeah, can you tell me more about your chapter?
Yeah, we have tried to follow the concept of which I called about the conditions, experiences as outcome, the conditions of social justice issues, and then the concept of mattering as experiences, and then the outcome of well-being. So we have tried to conceptualize that in the context of families and friends. So how are the conditions of having thriving families, and how is mattering as a kind of, how can mattering help the relationship between friends and families? And then we see we think that can help people to have a kind of a wellness or thriving relationships. So because we see that good relationships are good for people's mental health and well-being. We have also been inspired from Wales in this work on both families and friends, but also with the thriving work. And because the country of Wales was very concerned about the future generations. So in 2015, they passed a new act called the Wellbeing for Future Generations Act. And then they created this commissioner for future generations. And they created these public conversations. I was just thinking about it during this meaning-making context, because they were so clever to create these meaning-making processes on a national wide on what Wales do we want and what Wales do we want to leave behind, and they included citizens to have these concerns, and that has changed a lot of whole policy and practices in the city of Wales. So this is how we kind of try to do this in a very small context. What kind of context do you want? What kind of family do you want? And what kind of family do you want to leave behind? And what kind of values do you care for in that? And how do you negotiate them? And how is it roomed for that? Has been kind of the main kind of red thread through that work. But it's really fascinating work what is happening in Wales on those issues.
I love to think about the space that we create with each other in our relationships and in our larger communities, because I think when I'm talking about communication, people could be tempted to just think about the words that we say, but it's not just about, speaking at each other. And I think about it with the loop model specifically, when I'm thinking about these untold stories. If a goal is part of a better social world, or in a relationship, interpersonally, in a larger community, if part of a goal is to make an untold story a told story, then that process doesn't just look like telling the person with the untold story, hey, you speak up. It's what kind of space are we creating? What are we cultivating in our relationships so that people feel they can show up in this way where they get to tell their stories and be heard in what meaning they're making?
Yeah, I think that is so eloquently put out. It's exactly that. It's creating the conditions so people can have their choice to express what they care for and also what they are having concerns about. So I really enjoy the loop model because it really focuses on the living stories and the untold stories, and then I think that is a very great kind of conceptualized framework for us to invite people into these conversations. And I like the word space. So how do you create these spaces, which I think has been the whole idea from both the CMM for me and also the social and relational construction theory, is creating space for meaning making.
Yeah. I kind of want to pivot our conversation a little bit. You mentioned earlier that your work has also become about dignity, poverty, and social justice. Those are some of the words I know you use around these topics. So I'm curious, how is that related to mattering? How did this emerge out of the work that you've been doing and what you've already been talking about?
Yeah, in one sense, you can say you can flip, or you can exchange the word mattering to dignity. So for me, kind of the condition aspect of mattering is the social justice issues, and mattering can also be worthiness or dignity. So it's kind of it's been very important for us to how to create conditions that people can live dignified lives, so that people can really feel that it's room for you. So, for example, we have had these many conversations about in the Norwegian countries about social inclusion. But social inclusion can also mean that you, who are kind of outside the majority, has to become the same as the majority. And so it's been important for us not think about social inclusion only in that sense, but in a sense that we broaden up, that there's so many ways of living a life, and that has kind of the value of dignity in it.
Not just assimilating to
Yeah.
one version of meaning making, but creating space for everybody's ways of meaning making.
Yeah. And that was based in one of the research from Larry Davidson and his colleagues at Yale. I think it's a Yale Program for Recovery and Community Health, which has been a huge also inspiration for that work in our sense. It's about, and also Michael Rowe at the same center, about citizenship and dignity. So he wrote this article from fitting in to simply be let in, which is about two different ways of viewing and negotiating the meaning of social inclusion. It's not about fitting in and being like everyone else, but you can be let in as the person you are, and that has for us become very linked to dignity, and that is So you can say that you can change the word mattering also into worthiness or dignity.
Well, I'm interested to know about dignity and mattering specifically in the context of an experience that people have like poverty, because like I mentioned, so empowering, we can change our social worlds, we have, control. Poverty is a great example of things that sometimes are way outside of people's control. And so I'm curious to know more about how do you speak this, language and meaning around mattering and dignity into a context that is and can be so oppressive and keep people so stuck.
That's a big topic, and I think to give a short answer on that, it's been to give people in those kind of living conditions their dignity back, is that giving them the resources and to actually take their choices. So not viewing them in this attitude of being a charity case, but actually give people the money, for example, to and that they actually take good choices themselves, and not that we in the professional society then say that this is good for you or not. So really listen to them, but not only listen to them, but also take them so that seriously to help them with their money, because if you're in poverty, it's about money. So so you need to give them the way in which they can earn the money and have a dignified life, either through jobs or basic income or different kinds of perspectives on that, but also invite people who are living in those and poverty a real opportunity to impact the policies and the practices involved. I think that is so important for not, and also we can see that in the Nordic welfare states, it can be more because we have a very good safety net with the Norwegian and the Nordic welfare state. But then if you are socially excluded or living in poverty in such a good welfare state, it's even more shameful maybe to live outside. So in that sense, it can be very shameful of that. So we really, and then so they don't kind of maybe show up on parents' meetings or whatever. So you need to create those conditions where they actually can take and have hope and have faith that people take good decisions if they have good resources. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And as you're speaking, I'm having this kind of image come to me that when I talk about a communication perspective, I often use glasses as a kind of visual metaphor. Both of us are glasses wearers, so you'll understand this. Thinking about how you see without your glasses on. Maybe things are a little blurry, depending on your vision.
Yeah.
Then you put your glasses on and you see things differently. So it's not necessarily that the thing changed, just that you're using this different lens. And I was just, as you're speaking, then thinking about, I don't know if you've ever seen like a 3D movie and put on those little paper 3D glasses. I was just thinking about that, how that changes if you're looking at something that's supposed to be 3D and there's kind of these like overlays, different like color versions of the same thing on top of each other. And then you put the glasses on and it, pops out at you. And so I was thinking about meaning, of course, how could I not be during this conversation, but such a great example of that. There's always multiple layers of things going on, that it's not really that abstract to talk about helping people feel a sense of dignity and a sense of mattering. What you kind of just said, is money is dignity. So it's like, that's kind of the overlay I'm seeing with my like 3D communication glasses on, my 3D meaning making glasses on, that it's like, that is overlaid on this. And so it's not abstract. See, how do we, I'm thinking too about like, maybe you heard Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like you need the basic food and then you can feel these things, but maybe that's a little more condensed than that image would have you believe it is, to say that, well, yes, if this, then that, but in a way, the food, the money, the housing, the clothing, the basic needs being met is the condition for dignity and mattering.
Absolutely. So you have to work with the conditions also, so that people can have a real opportunity to be active in their life, because it's really hard on people's life and mental health, struggling with the finances in this world we are living at the moment. And also we can see that I think we have seen some research also about and how people relate to people in different socioeconomic classes. We have some issues. We have looked into some research showing that professionals talk to people who are living in poverty and talk with people who are not living in poverty. So we have also this. You have to challenge these ways of relating and invite to new relationships, which I think, for example, CMM and relational construction can help, because you have to be critical to what is taken for granted, and you have to open the space for new meaning making processes, and not imposing kind of different expert discourses on people without taking seriously their point of view.
I love this language that you've used of the condition, experience, outcomes. That's what you shared. I've never heard that as a framework before. Can you tell me any more about like where that came from, or more examples of how you're applying that? Because that seems really helpful.
Yeah, well, it's basically one of Isaac Brzezinski's work. So he's a big mentor for us. So in the work we've done on both the action research now in Norway, but also it's inspired from the CMM model and also the relational context model. About there's always a context, there's always conditions, and we are relating to these conditions, but we are making them up as we also are relating to them. But mostly it was because of this How We Thrive book. We started to kind of work together on how do we work on the conditions, so that everything is not only psychological individual experiences. You have to kind of contextualize, and that's why we wanted to see. So in that sense, we use the word wellness, fairness, and worthiness. For example, that could be 3 topics or wellness, fairness, and mattering. But so we are always trying to look at the conditions to promote the balance of experiencing both feeling value and adding value, and then that can help on the outcomes of well-being. And also we have looked into this, I think it's a WHO report on participation as a driver for health equity, that shows that people who participate have a real opportunity to participate in their life and their relationships and in their community and work. They have higher levels of well-being, and people who have higher levels of well-being participates more in their life and work. So there is this circular kind of relational concept. So we have to work with the conditions, especially as poverty is such a good example So we are working on those every time. How do we look at the conditions? How do we create conditions? How do we co-create conditions to promote the experiences and outcomes of mattering and well-being? If that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, it does. And I want to pause on the language again, because you added two more kind of dimensions to what we already talked about around wellness earlier, talk about fairness and worthiness. To me, these all kind of, seem like dimensions of under the mattering umbrella. But I'm curious to know what's emerged for you in your research as far as why can't you just say wellness? Like what does it mean for you to specify fairness and worthiness? What do those mean?
Yeah, and it may be also because English is not my first language, but
Sure.
it's for me, well-being and wellness is kind of the same issues, and also fairness is also the same issues for me as social justice, and these different justice concepts, and then mattering and worthiness are for me the same.
Yeah,
kind of topics.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and we're talking about relational construction as in relationships between people, but also interesting to think about relationships between all the concepts that you're trying to work around.
Absolutely. And also these are words and concepts that also need to negotiate meaning around, because mattering can mean different things to different people as well. Not only that we're promoting mattering and conditions, but also people have a relationship with their language, and also language creates worlds. So one of my kind of gurus when I was trained as a family therapist, Tom Anderson, he wrote this article about the language is not innocent, and that is so linked to the relational and social constructionist view of language, that language is both formative and informative at the same time.
It's been a great practice in really embodying not taking meaning for granted, to be able to work with such an international community, because I work with a lot of people who English is also not their first language. And so there are things that I would take for granted around the connotation of a word in English that once we, say it out loud and clarify with each other, that's, so much richer for us to have like talked through that. But could be easy for me to take for granted if I'm in a context of people speaking English around me.
Yeah. And that kind of sums up very good what we did with together with these young people and other people in this context, is that invite people to listen to their responses to the questions, and not only think that we have the answers for how people matter or how people have lived their lives, but listen to their views and experiences on what a good life, or what has been troublesome for them, and that is an invitation to meaning making.
Coming back to this language of language again, talking about that, languages could be a barrier, we don't speak the same language, referencing maybe English or Norwegian or Spanish or French, any number of different established languages. But you could also say, we're not speaking the same language right now. We're both speaking English, but maybe we're not speaking the same language right now. We're not paying attention to the language that's used. So that I just thought of that as you were speaking now, that just the layers of meaning are so endless.
Yeah. And in that sense, I hopefully, and our experiences, maybe yours as well, is that actions and social practices can emerge. And social change hopefully also can emerge from those kind of conversations. And I think for me, it has been important to have the view of looking into the negotiations, but also the hardcore actions of conditions, because that's some things we need to do something about, and something is just meaning making and languaging, but that's how it's linked together for me.
Yeah, I like the language piece or the meaning making as like a jumping off point. Like that's really important to start there. And then, where do you go from there in terms of action? As we're wrapping up this conversation, I'm curious to know what else is emerging. Is there anything that's central to your work or important that you wanted to talk about today that we kind of haven't got the chance to touch on yet?
Great question again. I think I'm very engaged in this work of mattering at the moment, and language, because and especially on maybe at the moment very interested in students, because here in this city the students are extraordinarily great, or they have tried to learn how to work on this ABCD, asset-based community development models. They want to create good communities. They want to get to work together. They have this project of high neighbor. They want to kind of, because they're feeling lonely and not so engaged. So how do they create and co-create these good social worlds? I think that is for me the most inspiring at the moment. How to work with young students and see how they improve and and invite and take action in their contexts to have a good life.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot in what you're saying about how it seems like you have helped other people to embody these concepts around mattering. Would you be willing to share any stories or examples of how you yourself are trying to embody mattering in your own life?
Oh, for me, it's about for me, it's about soccer and football.
Mm.
For me, it's about having a context where I can look at football and also hiking and being
Mm.
outside outdoors. I really feel that relationship with nature
Mhm.
and football and good friends and family is most important for me. So that is one way, and also hopefully have a good, which I have, a good working environment where we have a lots of fun,
Mhm.
and if we laugh a lot, that's a good kind of, for me, helpful for my sense of mattering. But
Mhm.
for me, it's been. I'm not sure if I have helped so many people, but I have been in very great contexts where we have
Yeah.
co-created mattering together, and
Yeah,
that
yeah.
has been. So I'm very. For me, it's been fortunate to be in those kind of contexts where we can, and these spaces, as you said, where this where mattering and wellness and dignity can occur.
Yeah, it sounds like you get to be a witness to a lot of that.
Yeah.
I just love the question of embodiment because that's something I think about around CMM in a communication perspective. And Kim Pierce and I have talked about this recently, the difference between knowing about CMM and really embodying it. And I feel like that's a practice that it's, maybe
Yeah.
hard to draw the line between my professional life, my personal life, because so much of what I
Yeah.
learn and talk about in a professional capacity is seeping into my personal life, which
Mm,
I
mm,
appreciate because it feels
mm.
meaningful to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what comes to mind then is this, when I was so fortunate to be part. I did my PhD in the Taos Institute PhD program, which was fantastic,
Yeah.
and then I also met lots of inspiring people who have inspired me for the work I'm doing now. But I also remember John Schotter, and John Schotter, he was talking a lot about these issues about withness knowledge and
Mm,
aboutness knowledge. So you can have aboutness knowledge about things,
mm.
but you can also have this withness knowledge about when you are, as you say, embodied, and the
Yeah.
embodied knowledge you have about or with things,
Hmm.
where you bring yourself into the aboutness thinking.
Yeah, that's a cool distinction to make. Yeah. Okay. One last opportunity. Anything else you want to talk about before I ask you my last question?
I really enjoyed talking to you,
Me too.
and I really you have a really great podcast, and
I
thank you for
appreciate
having the
that.
podcast
Thank
to
you.
promote these ideas and practices around the world. So thank you, Abby.
Yeah, for me, it's about like kind of passing it along because I feel very empowered in a lot of the conversations I've got to have in the context that I've got to be in, and so I just hope other people can experience that too. Um,
Yeah,
but yes,
absolutely.
as I wrap up, I always like to end on going back to this language of better social worlds, and I feel like we've danced around it already,
Yeah,
so that this conversation has already been so hopeful, but I'd love to give you one last chance to be clear on the meaning that you're making around how you would define a better social world, what it looks like to you, what you hope for us.
I think if people have a real opportunity and having a space and context where they can be invited and invite others to
Hmm.
add value and feel valued, I think we have come a long way.
That's a great answer and a great place to end. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Abbie. And it's also a pleasure to talk with you.
Okay, that is all for our conversation with Ottar. At the end of each episode, I like to offer questions to reflect on that act as a next turn so the conversation doesn't stop just because the episode does. Today, I have one question for you, and that is, how can you create a sense of mattering for yourself and others in your communities? I think this is just such great language and something that is really important for us all to be reflecting on, especially now that we have some tools and stories that Ottar shared today to help us understand what it might look like to bring this idea of mattering to life for ourselves. You're welcome to reach out to me to share your reflections on that question, as well as any of your own questions or ideas. You can do that through email, the website, by commenting on Instagram and YouTube, or by commenting under this episode on the CMM Institute Substack. Links to all those places are in the show notes. The reason I invite you to share your reflections with me is to stay in dialogue. Other great ways to keep dialogue going is to follow the show wherever you listen, leave a rating and review, share this episode with someone you want to invite into the conversation, and take that survey. Help me co-create next year's podcast. I am supported by the CMM Institute for Personal and Social Evolution. This podcast is just one of many initiatives designed to create space for more conversations that move us toward those better social worlds we hope to create. You can learn more about the CMM Institute and our other initiatives like the Cosmo Parenting Substack, which you can now subscribe to, our upcoming CMM Fellows presentation on December 11th, 2024, and so much more. Links to all of those are in the show notes for you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being curious. And thank you for being a part of this story. I'm Abbie, and this has been Stories Lived, Stories Told.